You can tokenize a building in an afternoon, deploy a token pointed at the asset, mint a supply, and by lunch, you have something that demos beautifully. This video is about the distance between the token that demos and the token that survives real market conditions, and why almost every tutorial you have seen only ever builds the first one. So if you are the person who has a real-world asset to tokenize in a way your legal team will actually sign off on. By the end of this video, you will know the 4 architectural layers a compliant tokenization platform needs and the specific job each one does. A quick disclaimer here, this video is not for the viewer looking for a fractional property to invest in. This is for the person who has to issue. Most teams approach a regulated asset the way they would approach any other token. Mint it, distribute it, let it trade. Compliance in that model is something you do around the token. Here is why it fails. A regulated asset carries rules that do not stop at issuance. Who is allowed to hold it? How long they must hold it? How many holders there can be in a given jurisdiction? Whether this specific buyer today is eligible. Those rules do not apply once at the moment of the sale. They apply to every transfer forever, including the ones you have never seen. The peer-to-peer transfer at 2 AM between the wallets you have never heard of. And the plain token cannot enforce any of that. An ERC-20 transfer does not ask permission, it moves. By the time of your off-chain whitelist notices, the asset is already in a wallet that should never have received it. And now you are unwinding a transaction on a public ledger. So the reframe that this whole video rests on is this. For a regulated asset, compliance cannot sit around the token. It has to travel inside it. The token itself has to refuse a transfer that breaks the rules. Everything else we build is service of that one idea. That idea already has a standard. It is called ERC-3643. You will also hear it called the T-Rex protocol. Token for regulated exchanges, and it is not a fringe experiment. It is the standard behind the majority of regulated institutional tokenization happening today, on the order of $32 billion in real-world assets across more than 180 jurisdictions. Governance of it sits with an association whose members include the DCCC, Apex, and Invesco. This is where the institutional market has actually landed. What makes it different is the first layer of our architecture. The token enforces its own rules. An ERC-3643 transfer is conditional. Before it executes, the contract checks whether the transfer is allowed, and if it is not, the transfer reverts. The compliance is not a wrapper. It is in the transfer function, but a token that checks eligibility needs to know who is it checking. That is the second layer, on-chain identity. ERC-3643 uses a framework called on-chain ID, where an investor holds a verified identity on-chain, carrying claims that this person passed KYC, this person is an accredited investor in this jurisdiction, and etc. etc. The claims are issued by parties you trust and verified by the token. So put the 2 layers together and watch what happens on the transfer. Someone tries to move the token. The contract looks at the recipient's on-chain identity, checks the claims against the offering's rules, and only then decides. Eligible, and it settles. Not eligible, and it reverts before anything moves. The rules and the identity meet at the moment of transfer, which is exactly the moment a plain token has no answer for. Now, standing this up, the token contracts, the identity framework, the claim issuers, and the integrations behind them is a genuine engineering program. And it is one where the compliance design has to be right before you issue, not after. At SPO Software, we build regulated tokenization platforms end-to-end, including the identity and compliance layers. If that is the road you are on, the form to talk to us is in the description. Anyway, a token that can say no is only as good as the rules you give it. This is the third layer, the compliance engine. This is where your legal requirements become code. ERC-3643 is a modular here on purpose. You attach compliance rule as separate modules so the token can enforce things like a maximum number of holders, a cap on how much any one investor can hold, restrictions by country, and lockup periods where the asset simply cannot move for a defined window. When a regulation changes, you change a module, not the asset. Not every holder's token. The rules are configuration, not a rebuild. But now we reach the layer that blockchain engineers forget and lawyers never will. The fourth layer, providing that the token is actually connected to the real thing. Because a token that represents a building is worthless if there is no enforceable link between the two. That link is not on the chain. It is built from three things working together. A legal structure, typically a special purpose vehicle that actually holds the asset, so that owning the token means owning a unit of the vehicle that owns the building. Custody of the underlying title, so the deed cannot walk away independently of the token, and verifiable data feeds, oracles and attestations that bring proof of the real-world state on-chain, so that the property exists, that is still insured, that the collateral still is there. Permissioned token that enforces transfers, the on-chain identity behind each holder, the compliance engine that encodes the rules, and the legal and oracle layer that ties the token to the asset. Miss any one of them and you do not have a compliant platform. You have a demo with a legal opinion stapled to it. Are we painting an idealized picture? Partly. So let me be honest about where this architecture stops solving your problem, because these are the questions that decide whether a tokenization project is real or theater. The first, enforceability. Your token can say on-chain that this wallet owns a unit of the same asset. But if there is a dispute, it is not the chain that decides who owns the building. It is a court in a jurisdiction reading a legal document. The token is only as strong as the legal structure behind it. Get the SPV and the governing law right and the token is a clean representation of a real claim. Get them wrong and you have minted a very expensive receipt. The second is a truth that market does not advertise. Tokenizing an asset does not make it liquid. The reporting is striking. Of the tens of billions of dollars in tokenized real-world assets, a large share barely trades at all. Forbes recently put the market around $60 billion and pointed out that most of it is not moving. Tokenization solves issuance, settlement, and compliance. It does not, on its own, create buyers. And the third follows from the first two. For a security token to trade freely on a secondary market, that market usually has to be regulated venue. The rules that govern who can operate one and where vary sharply between the EU, the Gulf, and the US, and that choice belongs in your architecture from day one, not bolted on when someone finally asks where this thing is going to trade. None of this is a reason not to tokenize. It is the difference between a team that has done this before and a team that is about to learn it in production. So you have issued a compliant asset and the compliance travels inside the token. But the moment that asset starts trading, it generates something else the regulator now wants: reportable transactions. And the reporting obligation switched on this year that most teams are still threatening as a legal problem when it's really a data problem. One of your systems have to solve it at right time or not at all. In the next video, we break down exactly what crypto asset reporting demands of your architecture and why the fields you missed this year cannot be recovered next year. Consider subscribing, and as always, remember to stay on the block to stay ahead.